I never thought that a quiet Tuesday dinner, meatloaf, overcooked peas, the usual, would end with my own son announcing my exile from the house I'd built with my bare hands. Derek leaned back in his chair like he'd just closed a deal. "We're moving in next month," he said, nodding toward the kitchen. "Finally, this place'll get some real use." Jenna laughed without looking up from her phone. "It's about time. This whole house? Wasted on one old lady? It's ridiculous." I set my fork down carefully. My hand was trembling. Not from age, from the pure shock of it. This wasn't a joke. They meant it. Jenna kicked her heels off, toes tapping on the hardwood. "I mean, seriously," she went on, as if I wasn't sitting right there. "She's got 3 guest rooms and an attic full of crap. We'll turn that into a nursery/office. Easy." Derek grinned at her. "Yeah, Mom's finally starting to accept it. Right, Ma? Downsizing and all that." There was no warmth in his voice, just assumption, entitlement. I said nothing, not yet. They'd stopped seeing me as a person years ago. To them, I was a place, a bank account, a stepping stone. Derek had called me fragile when I stopped driving at night. Jenna called me quirky when I labeled the leftovers. But their favorite insult was always the one they dressed up as logic. "You shouldn't be alone in a house like this. You could fall. You're not getting any younger. We're just trying to help." Help? That word again. I'd spent 6 years helping them. Quietly, constantly. Babysitting. Grocery money. Covering car payments when Derek's business ran dry. Sitting in waiting rooms while Jenna recovered from surgeries she never thanked me for. And now they were here, sitting at my table, eating food I made, casually laying claim to the home I'd swept, painted, and paid off with 29 years of work. I looked at the window behind them. Light was fading, and the shadows of the big oak tree stretched across the dining room wall like cracks in glass. Jenna turned to me with that smug, sugary smile. "We'll be such a help around here. Don't worry, we'll keep your room just how you like it." My room. In my house. That was the moment. Right then. Something inside me didn't just break. It closed. Like a door locking. I smiled and reached for my water glass. Not yet, but soon. They had no idea. It wasn't mine anymore. 3 weeks earlier, I had stood on the courthouse steps, the ink still drying on the documents that severed me from that house. The same house my husband and I bought in 1985. The same one where I raised Derek, painted the walls 3 times, and replaced that sagging roof myself after Gary passed. I'd just finalized the sale. Quiet, legal, deliberate. No tears, no ceremony. Just a calm signature and a handshake with the couple who would take my place. Sam and Alicia, newlyweds from church, expecting their first child. They reminded me of who I used to be, before life turned into obligation. That dinner Derek insisted on hosting, that was their first visit in 6 months. Not a birthday, not a holiday, not even when I'd fallen on the back step in February. But now they were back, like always, when they wanted something. They hadn't even noticed the for sale sign missing from the yard. Jenna had waltzed in that afternoon with an armful of throw pillows, claiming she was testing colors for the guest suite. Derek walked through the house like a surveyor, tapping walls and muttering about renovations and square footage. That's when I knew. They thought I would just hand it over, not ask, not offer to buy it, just take. 6 years of being treated like a burden wrapped in bubble wrap, a backup babysitter, a walking checkbook. Derek used to laugh about my pension, called it grandma money. Jenna once said to a neighbor, loud enough for me to hear, "Honestly, she's just keeping the house warm until we're ready. It's not like she needs it." I pretended not to hear. That was always my mistake, letting them think silence meant agreement. But I wasn't silent when I signed the contract. I didn't flinch when I handed over the deed. I'd spent the last 2 years making sure every part of the transition would be seamless, quiet, invisible, until it wasn't. It wasn't just about cutting them off, though God knows they'd earned it. It was about choosing myself, maybe for the first time in decades. I didn't want 4 bedrooms and cold hallways anymore. I didn't need the yard work or the leaking skylight. What I needed was peace, light, Safety. A place no one would barge into and call their own. So I bought it. A 2-bedroom condo across from the library. Elevator access. A tiny balcony just big enough for 2 chairs and a geranium. I had no intention of dying in that house. And I had no intention of letting them live in it either. They just didn't know it yet. The first time Derek called me a glorified babysitter with a mortgage. I pretended I didn't hear. We were in the living room. I had just handed him my old space heater because their furnace had broken, and Jenna was curled up on my couch, scrolling Instagram like she lived there. He didn't even say it to my face, said it to her, just loud enough. She laughed. She should be grateful we need her. Most people her age are just, baggage. I swallowed that moment like spoiled food. That's what I'd been doing for years. Swallowing, ignoring, making excuses. He doesn't mean it. She's just young. They're stressed. But it never stopped. Jenna constantly complained about the way I cooked. Too much salt. It's not 1972 anymore. She made a face when I wore my old church sweaters. You look like a backup singer for a thrift store gospel choir, she joked once. In front of friends. And Derek? My son? He'd chuckle and say things like, "She's just giving you a hard time, Ma. Don't be so sensitive." He used to defend me when he was little. God, I remember when he punched a kid in 3rd grade for saying I looked old. Now he stood next to his wife, watching her chip away at me like I was drywall. The real shift came 6 months ago. Derek called me, late, sounding half distracted. "Hey, Ma, just wondering, did you ever file those power of attorney papers we talked about?" We had never talked about that. Not once. I froze. "What are you talking about?" I asked. He chuckled. Just in case something happens to you. I figured it'd be easier if I was already on your accounts. You're not getting any younger. That was the moment I knew. Not guessed, not feared. Knew. He wasn't just waiting. He was planning. Every comment about my memory, every joke about me getting too tired, every eye roll when I asked about the thermostat or turned off lights to save money. He was testing the waters, seeing how far he could push without me noticing. But I noticed. I noticed everything. That night, I poured myself a cup of tea and sat down with the folder I'd been building for 2 years. Housing market listings, legal notes, lawyer referrals. I flipped to the tab marked Exit Plan. No more asking for respect. No more waiting for gratitude. It was time I stopped making space for people who only saw me as furniture. By the time Derek called about that paperwork, I was already gone. Not physically, but in every way that mattered. 6 months earlier, I'd signed the sale agreement with Sam and Alicia, the couple from church. She teaches 3rd grade. He works at the post office. Polite, humble, kind. The kind of people who looked me in the eye when they spoke, not through me. We sat in the church basement after service, over styrofoam cups of coffee. I said, "I'm not listing it publicly. I just want it in the hands of someone who'll love it." Alicia smiled and said, "We'd be honored." I could have cried. The papers were filed quietly with Mr. Carter, the real estate lawyer I'd used since Gary and I bought our first home. No drama, no signs in the yard, just quiet, legal progress. I started giving things away, little by little. A rocking chair to my friend Janice's daughter, my wedding china to the church rummage sale. I kept only what mattered. My books, my photos, my green Dutch oven. I sold the riding lawnmower to a teenager down the street who needed cash for college. He didn't know it used to belong to Gary. I didn't tell him. Let the weight of that memory rest with me. The truth? I was tired. Tired of gutters that needed cleaning. Tired of pretending I didn't mind being alone in a house built for 4. Tired of freezing winter nights when the furnace groaned like it was dying. And more than anything, tired of the vultures circling. I knew what would happen if I stayed. I'd slip into quiet obedience. Hand over one key, then another, then a bank login, then a signature on something I didn't quite understand. I saw it all coming. Because I'd watched it happen to too many women. I knew smart, proud, generous women who gave until there was nothing left to give. I wasn't going to be next. So I picked a new life. A 2-bedroom condo with an elevator and no stairs to fall down. A community garden where I could grow tomatoes without pulling my back. A balcony facing west, where the sunset hits the railing just so. No more waiting to be cast aside. No more wondering if I'd be welcome at Christmas. They thought I was staying because I had nowhere else to go. They were wrong. I was staying long enough to leave on my own terms. The morning after the sale closed, I drove to the condo alone. No ceremony, just me, my travel mug of coffee, and a sense of weightlessness I hadn't felt in years. The building was newish, brick with white trim, tidy landscaping, not a leaf out of place. I parked in my assigned spot, stepped out, and looked up at my new home. A simple second-floor unit with a screened-in balcony. No stairs, no Derek, no Jenna. I hadn't just sold my old house. I'd bought this new one outright with part of the proceeds. No mortgage, no repairs waiting to ambush me. Just 2 bedrooms, an elevator down the hall, and a community garden full of marigolds and tomatoes. Inside, it smelled like fresh paint and lemon polish. There was sunlight in every room, a breeze through the window, silence, but the kind that made you breathe deeper, not hold your breath. I stood in the kitchen, running my hand along the counter. Smooth quartz, no crumbs, no sarcastic voices behind me asking why I still use paper towels like it's 1982. I laughed out loud. Alone and free. This place wasn't less. It wasn't a downgrade. It was mine. No guest rooms for ungrateful children. No attic to fill with their junk. Just a place designed for my comfort, not for their plans. I'd already begun moving my things in. The lease was signed, the electricity and water in my name. All the essentials were here. But I still had keys to the house. And time to say goodbye. Mr. Carter never raised his voice. He didn't need to. He was the kind of man who made you sit up straighter just by clearing his throat. Mid-70s, 3-piece suits, and a pen that probably cost more than Derek's watch. He'd been our lawyer since Gary passed, and if there was anyone I trusted to make things airtight, it was him. He handled the sale personally, triple-checked every clause, confirmed the funds, and even scheduled the condo closing in the same week. I asked him to move everything through, quietly, no notice, no noise. "Are you sure you want to do it this way?" he'd asked during our first meeting. "Absolutely," I said. No fanfare, just facts. We met again 2 weeks before the dinner. I brought cookies, like I always did, and he brought something better, a folder with my freedom in it. "The sale's locked," he said, flipping through pages. "Funds cleared, condo secured, title transferred, all done." He slid a second document across the table. I also took the liberty of drawing up a cease and desist clause for unauthorized occupancy. Just in case, I blinked. "You think they'll try to break in?" Mr. Carter didn't answer right away. He folded his hands. "I've had 3 separate calls from your son in the past 6 months. First asking if your will had been updated. Then if you'd granted anyone power of attorney. Then a voicemail requesting a meeting about managing your financial affairs going forward." I sat very still. "He's not just curious, Mrs. Langley. He's preparing for something. You need to be as prepared as he is." I nodded. "That's why I came to you." His face softened. "Just a little. You've done everything right. But understand this. Once they realize what you've done, they're going to come at you. Emotionally. Legally, maybe. You need to stay calm and stay factual. Calm and factual," I repeated, like a vow. He passed me a fresh folder. "Here's everything you'll need if they push. Deed transfer, condo closing, asset breakdown. Digital copies are stored with me. If they show up uninvited, call the police. If they try to guilt you, send them to me." It was the first time in years I didn't feel alone in the room. He stood as I left. "Mrs. Langley," I turned. "Yes?" "You're not just reclaiming your house. You're reclaiming your name." I drove home slowly that day. Not out of hesitation, but clarity. Derek had lawyers in his sights, but I had one standing at my back. So now you know. Over the last 6 months, I sold the house to a young couple from church. I bought myself a condo with a garden view and an elevator that doesn't rattle like my knees. I closed bank accounts, locked up my credit, and hired a lawyer who's handled enough estate vultures to know one by smell. I took back control. Because the truth is, Derek and Jenna didn't start treating me like I was in their way. They just stopped pretending they weren't. The comments, the eye rolls, the suggestions that I was too old, too fragile, too alone to manage a big place like this. They had been setting the trap for years. But they were wrong about me. I didn't sell the house out of fear. I sold it to keep it from them. And now we're back at the dinner table where this story began. Tuesday night, meatloaf, green beans, mashed potatoes I whipped with too much cream because Jenna always said mine were lumpy. Derek was leaned back in my chair like he already owned it. "We're moving in next month," he said, smug as a cat in a birdhouse. "Finally, this place'll get some real use." Jenna smirked, one heel dangling off her toe. "Honestly, it's sad watching this house just stagnate. It needs life. A family." I smiled, folded my napkin slowly. Here it comes, I thought. I reached for my water and said, clear and calm, "That's awkward. I already sold the house." The sound of her fork hitting the plate was sharper than the silence that followed. Derek's mouth parted, but no sound came. His eyes scanned the room like he was looking for hidden cameras. "You? What?" "I sold it," I repeated, 3 weeks ago. "The deed is no longer in my name. It's not mine anymore." Jenna blinked, then narrowed her eyes. "You're joking. Please tell me you're joking." "Why would I joke?" I asked. "You never joked when you made plans to live here." Derek shook his head, like he was waking from a dream. "You can't just sell the house without telling us." That's mine," I cut in, "was mine. And now it isn't." For a second, no one moved. No one breathed. And for the first time in years, I watched my son realize I wasn't just his mother anymore. I was a woman with a plan. Derek finally spoke. "You didn't really sell it." "You're just saying that to punish us. You couldn't have gone through all that paperwork without telling us, without telling them. That right there was the problem. I didn't owe them an explanation, but I gave them one anyway, sealed, signed, and notarized." I reached down beside my chair and pulled up the folder I'd brought from my car, right on top of the casserole dish I was planning to send leftovers home in. I placed it gently on the table between the mashed potatoes and Derek's false sense of ownership. "I figured you'd say that," I said calmly. "So here's the paperwork. Transfer of title, closing statement, and my condo lease, just for fun." Jenna reached across and yanked the folder open like she was expecting Monopoly money. Her eyes moved faster with every page. $487,000, she whispered, her mouth half open. "That's what you got for it?" Derek grabbed the folder from her hands. "Where's the buyer's name?" "Sam and Alicia Henderson. From church. They move in next month," I said. "They're expecting their first child in the fall. I think they'll like the backyard." His face twisted. "You had no right to do this behind our backs." Behind their backs. As if they'd ever been behind me. They'd been standing on my shoulders for years. "You don't live here?" I said softly. "You never did. You stopped visiting. You stopped calling unless something was broken or overdue or declined." Jenna looked up, eyes flashing. "We're family. Families make decisions together." "No," I said. "Families support each other. This is what you've done." I flipped to a final page. My new address. My name, removed from the title of the house. My lease signed. My future claimed. I looked up at both of them, their eyes scanning the proof like it might rearrange itself if they stared long enough. "You asked nothing," I continued. "You assumed everything." I folded the folder closed and slid it across the table like a check at the end of a meal. It was their turn to feel full, too full, on something they couldn't digest. Jenna's mouth opened, but no sound came. Derek slumped back in the chair, his smirk completely gone now, replaced with something far rarer on his face, uncertainty. I didn't say another word. I didn't need to. The evidence had spoken. Derek's fist came down hard on the table, rattling the silverware. "You betrayed us." His voice was thick with disbelief. Not grief, not sadness, just rage. that the plan he'd written in his head was no longer mine to fulfill. You went behind our backs. You knew we were counting on this house. He snapped, standing now, towering over me like that was supposed to mean something. Jenna's voice came next, all sharpness and venom. After everything we've done for you, this is how you thank us? I didn't flinch. I didn't rise to meet their volume. I just folded my hands in my lap and looked at the people who used to smile in my Christmas photos, now snarling over mashed potatoes like the inheritance had died early. Derek paced behind his chair, like a caged thing. You always said this house would stay in the family, that it would be mine someday. No, I said quietly. You assumed it would be. He whirled around. Same thing. No, I repeated, looking him in the eye. It's not. Jenna crossed her arms and leaned back like she was waiting for the jury to agree with her. You told us we'd never have to worry, that you'd take care of us. I felt something rise in me then, not anger, not yet, but something deeper, older. I did take care of you, I said, and you mistook that for permission to take everything else. The room went still. I let it. Then I said what had been waiting on the edge of my throat for years. No, after everything I've done for you. They didn't move. You don't call unless you want something. You don't visit unless there's a bill or a favor or some appliance breaking down. You treat me like a backup generator, only useful when your lights go out. Derek opened his mouth to argue, but I cut him off with one glance. I covered your rent when you couldn't make it. I watched your kids so you two could get away. 5 weekends in 1 year. I paid for your car after that accident, Jenna, when insurance wouldn't cover the deductible. And what did you call me the next week? A glorified babysitter with a pension. Jenna went pale. I shook my head. You didn't lose a home tonight. You lost control. They stood there, stunned. And I stayed seated, calm, clear, done. Because for the first time in a long time, I was speaking, and they were the ones with nothing to say. You want to talk about betrayal? I said, still seated, voice steady. Let's look at the record. I pulled another sheet from the folder. This one wasn't legal. It was personal. My handwriting, neat, small, deliberate. A list I started last winter, after Jenna laughed and said, we'll never be able to afford anything unless your mom kicks off or cashes out. She said it while I was in the next room, folding laundry for their daughter. Derek glanced at the paper in my hand like it might bite him. I began reading. $12,000 to cover 3 months of your overdue rent after Derek's business partner ran off with the books. $18,000 to help you buy the Honda after the insurance payout wasn't enough. $20,000 for Jenna's surgery when the out-of-network clause left you stuck. $300 for school supplies, uniforms, and sports fees over the past 5 years. $800 in groceries and household essentials that were never paid back. $500 for that emergency vacation you needed to reset your marriage. I looked up at Jenna when I read that one. She looked away. That's over $50,000 in 6 years, I said, not counting the unpaid favors, the driving, the babysitting, the things I did without you ever having to ask twice. Jenna scoffed. So what? You want us to repay you now? No, I said, folding the list once and placing it back in the folder. I want you to understand that your whole case, that I owe you something, is based on a lie. Derek shifted, suddenly unsure of where to look. We thought you were doing it because you loved us. I did, I said. But love doesn't mean endless access. It doesn't mean entitlement. I pushed back from the table, stood up slow and steady. This wasn't revenge. This was protection. Of myself. Of what I have left. They said nothing. I could feel it. The turning of the gears. The realization that what they called love had been convenience. What they called care had been calculation. And now, there was a price. Not a financial one. An emotional one. Because what I'd given freely, for years, was never going to be theirs again. Jenna stood frozen, her arms crossed like a shield that wasn't working anymore. Derek sat, hunched forward, eyes locked on the table, hands clenched into anxious fists. Good. Let it sink in. I reached into the folder one last time and pulled out a single printed email, one Mr. Carter had shared with me a few weeks ago. I slid it across the table. Derek's name was at the top. "I wasn't going to bring this up," I said. "I thought maybe it was a misunderstanding, or just poor judgment." He looked down. His lips parted, then clamped shut again. But then I remembered something Mr. Carter said. He told me to be careful. He said, "You are asking questions, not just about my house, but about my power of attorney." Jenna's head jerked toward him so fast her earring hit her neck. I watched her go pale. "You were trying to gain control of my legal documents?" I asked, though it wasn't a question anymore. "You asked about having me sign over authority, quietly, behind my back." Derek started to speak. "It wasn't like that." "No?" I cut in. "Then what was it like?" He opened his mouth, closed it again. I kept going. "You asked my lawyer if I had memory issues. You asked if I had a medical directive on file. You were trying to build a case before I even knew I needed to protect myself. I was just thinking ahead," he muttered, "in case something happened to you." "Funny," I said. "You weren't nearly that concerned when I slipped on the back stairs and bruised 3 ribs. Didn't hear from you once that week." Jenna sat down slowly, like her knees couldn't hold her weight. I looked at both of them. "You weren't planning to help me. You were planning to manage me, to corner me into becoming dependent, then take over once I didn't have the energy to fight back." Neither of them spoke. I leaned forward, voice quiet but sharp enough to cut glass. "That's why I sold the house. That's why I moved the money. That's why I changed my accounts." Derek stared at the paper, like it might start lying for him if he glared hard enough. "I didn't run from you," I said. "I got ahead of you." The silence was thick now, not with confusion or shock, but with exposure. There was nothing left to hide behind, not paperwork, not family ties, not excuses. For once, they saw me clearly, and they knew I saw them too. That night, after they left, or stormed out, I should say, I didn't clean the dishes. I didn't reheat the meatloaf or scrape the plates. I just sat there, at my kitchen table, alone, again, but this time, not because they forgot to visit or didn't pick up the phone. This time, it was because I had drawn the line, and I knew what that meant. My chest ached. Not sharp, not sudden, just a deep, dull pressure, like something old had finally broken loose and was floating up inside me. Not regret, not shame, grief. He was still my son. I remembered holding Derek the first night Gary stayed late at the shop, rocking him while the rain hit the windows. I remembered cutting his sandwiches into dinosaurs for lunch in 2nd grade. I remembered him at 17, saying he'd build me a guest house on his dream property one day. And now? Now he'd tried to put me under legal control so he could move into my home without paying a dime. How do you mourn someone who's still alive? That's what it felt like. A death of some kind, a slow loss, years in the making, finally catching up to the surface. I ran my hand along the table edge, the finish worn from decades of elbows and coffee mugs and homework and late-night conversations that used to mean something. Now it just felt like a prop, a memory of a family that didn't exist anymore. It would have been easier, maybe, if they'd screamed louder, if they'd made a scene. At least then I could have blamed their anger, but instead they looked cornered, not sorry, just caught, and that cut deeper than anything they said. The hardest part wasn't protecting myself. It was accepting that I had to, that I'd raised someone who saw my independence as a problem to solve, that I'd welcomed a daughter-in-law who saw my home as wasted square footage, not the life I built with every dollar and scraped knuckle. I didn't cry that night, not because I didn't want to, but because the tears had already been spent. Years ago, every time they took without thanking, demanded without asking, rolled their eyes when I showed up with cookies or cards or care, I sat in the stillness. And in that stillness, I made a vow. They may have walked out angry, but I would not let them walk back in, entitled. 2 days later, I called Derek, not to patch things up, not to beg for understanding. I wasn't looking for peace. I already had that. I was looking for closure, documented, witnessed, undeniable. He picked up on the second ring. "Ma?" His voice was wary, quieter than usual. "I'd like to meet," I said, "at Mr. Carter's office." A long pause. "Why?" Because if you still think I owe you something, I said evenly, we'll talk in front of a lawyer. Silence. I didn't fill it. I'd learned. Let silence work for you. Fine, he said eventually. We'll come. Not, I'll come. We. Of course Jenna would be there. I wanted her to be. Mr. Carter scheduled us for Thursday morning. Neutral space. Conference room. Legal backup. I wore navy slacks, a pressed blouse, and the necklace my mother gave me when I turned 40. It was the kind of outfit that didn't ask for respect. It expected it. When I walked into the waiting room, Jenna was already there, scrolling her phone like she wasn't nervous. Derek stood when he saw me. He looked tired, not out of guilt, but out of frustration, like someone still trying to get his way by playing the victim. Mr. Carter opened the door himself. "Come in," he said, calm as ever. "Let's get started." The room was clean and cold. Glass table, 4 chairs, a pitcher of water. Jenna sat across from me. Derek sat beside her. I stayed silent as Mr. Carter took his seat. "Before we begin," he said, placing his hands on a file, "I want to make something clear. The property on Elm Street is no longer under Mrs. Langley's ownership. The deed has been transferred, the funds settled. The transaction is complete." Derek's jaw clenched. "Any attempt to enter or occupy that property," Mr. Carter continued, "will be considered trespassing." Jenna opened her mouth, then closed it. Derek's leg bounced under the table. "She invited us to live there," he said. "She's just punishing us now." "No," I said softly. "I invited you to dinner, and you showed up with your moving plans." Mr. Carter didn't blink. "The house is not yours, and it never was." I let that sit. This wasn't revenge. It was reinforcement. Let them try to shout now. Every word was being heard and documented. Mr. Carter reached for one last file. It wasn't thick, just 2 pages, stapled, neat. But I saw Jenna flinch when he slid it across the table. "These are the digital records," he said calmly, "of the attempted access to Mrs. Langley's financial account, logged from an IP address associated with your home, Mrs. Moore." She didn't even try to lie, just looked at Derek like he was supposed to fix it. But he was frozen now. The kind of stillness that only comes when someone realizes they've lost everything they thought they could manipulate. "I was checking on a bill," she said weakly. "No," I said. "You were checking what you could reach before I noticed." Derek finally exhaled. "So this is what it's about? Punishing us? Embarrassing us in front of a lawyer?" Mr. Carter looked at him directly. "This is about protecting her from further exploitation and ensuring there is a documented record of your actions and her response." It wasn't said with heat, just fact, which made it land even harder. I leaned forward, my hands folded, voice low. "You told me once this house would eventually be yours, that you'd raise your kids here, that you were just waiting for me to be ready." He didn't respond. I was never confused about what that meant. I just hoped I was wrong. The air in the room thickened. There was nothing left to grab at, no affection to weaponize, no narrative to twist. Only the truth, printed and signed and handed back to them like a mirror they never wanted to look into. Jenna spoke next, but her voice was flat now, hollow. "You didn't have to make it so final." I raised an eyebrow. "What part of selling my home, closing my accounts, and retaining legal counsel did you think wasn't final?" Her cheeks flushed, but she didn't speak again. Mr. Carter stacked the last document, tucked it into the folder, and looked at me. "You're free to go whenever you're ready." I stood. Derek stayed seated, arms limp at his sides. Jenna picked up her purse, but didn't move toward the door. "I'm not angry anymore," I said, pausing at the threshold. "But I am done." They looked up. "I gave you a chance to speak your truth. What you did instead was prove mine." Then I walked out, and they didn't follow. I stood in the doorway of that cold conference room, folder in hand, coat draped over my arm, and for a moment, I just looked at them, not in pity, not in anger, just clarity. "I want to say something," I told Mr. Carter. He nodded, staying seated. "Off the record, just for them." I stepped back inside. Jenna shifted in her chair. Derek looked up, maybe thinking I'd soften, offer a hand, a way back in. But I didn't come to rescue anyone this time. I walked to the head of the table and placed both hands on the smooth glass surface. "You wanted my house," I said, meeting Derek's eyes. "You wanted my bank accounts, my name on your applications, my signature on your plans." Jenna opened her mouth. I held up a hand. She stopped. "You didn't just want the space I lived in. You wanted control of me. You didn't see me as a person anymore. You saw me as a placeholder. A door you could walk through when it suited you." Neither of them interrupted again. For years, I said yes, because I thought that's what love was. Help them, support them. Be there, no matter how little came back. I took a breath. But now I understand. You didn't want a mother, you wanted a resource. And then, for the first time, I felt it leave me, that pressure to please, that sick pull of guilt and obligation that had followed me through every favor, every check, every quiet insult. It lifted. "I will not hand over my life," I said. "I've given enough." Derek's face changed, just slightly. His shoulders dropped, his eyes lowered. Maybe for the first time he heard me, maybe not. I wasn't there to find out. Jenna looked away. I stepped back from the table. Mr. Carter rose as I reached the door again. But before I left, I turned one final time. "You always thought you were the ones waiting on me, for me to get old enough, tired enough, desperate enough. But I was never behind you." I held my chin high. "You've been behind me this entire time." And with that, I walked out. This time, when the door closed, it echoed, not as an ending, but as a beginning of something that finally belonged to me. The hallway outside Mr. Carter's office was quiet, until the door behind me slammed hard enough to shake the glass. I didn't turn around. Let them leave angry. Let them feel what it's like to walk out without control in their hands or pity at their backs. I passed 2 receptionists on the way out. They looked up, wide-eyed. They'd heard everything. The lawyer's office wasn't soundproof, and Derek hadn't exactly kept his voice down. One of the women, maybe mid-30s, soft eyes, gave me a look I'll never forget. Not sympathy, not curiosity, just understanding. I nodded once, and she gave me the faintest smile in return. Derek and Jenna stormed past me in the parking lot, not saying a word. He yanked the car door open so hard it bounced back, hitting his shin. Jenna was red-faced, throwing her purse into the back seat like it had betrayed her too. I sat in my car a moment longer, watching them from behind the wheel. That, I realized, was the real moment of shift. Not the deed transfer, not the lawyer's warning, not even the confrontation. It was this, watching them drive off without answers, without power, and most of all, without an audience. Because the one thing they'd always counted on, more than my money or my house or my silence, was my protection. But now, even the town was seeing them for who they were. By Friday, I'd already heard from 2 people, casually of course. "Is everything okay with Derek and Jenna? Someone said there was some kind of issue." "Did I hear right? You sold the house? That's wonderful. But I thought they were going to live there?" I didn't offer details. I didn't have to. People pay attention. People remember. The ones who bragged about what they were owed now looked ridiculous, with empty hands and nowhere to land. The whisper network that used to quietly shame older women for causing drama now turned its focus where it belonged. Not on me, on them. I didn't throw them under the bus. I simply stepped out of its way and watched them try to crawl out from under the weight of their own choices. They moved into a 2-bedroom rental off the highway. Beige siding, paper-thin walls, no yard. The kind of place you take when you have no backup plan and too much pride to stay with family. I didn't gloat. That's not who I am. But I won't pretend I didn't feel something. Not joy, but justice, when I heard it through a mutual acquaintance at church. "They didn't qualify for the mortgage," she said carefully. "Something about missing documentation and a flagged credit issue." I just nodded. That happens sometimes. What I didn't say, The documentation they planned to use was me, my house, my equity, my name. Derek had applied for a small business loan 3 weeks before our dinner, assuming he'd have proof of inherited property by the time the bank called. He didn't. The loan was denied. The business idea dried up. He stopped posting on LinkedIn. Jenna, meanwhile, had more immediate problems. Mr. Carter had reported the unauthorized credit access attempt to the fraud department, as he was legally required to do. No charges were filed. I made sure of that, but it was enough to alert their bank. Her joint account was flagged for security review. Her spending limit was cut in half. Her gym membership auto payment bounced, and the whispers continued. I heard from Emily, my niece, that someone had mentioned the lawyer's office incident at a PTA meeting. They said Derek tried to take legal control of your estate, that he got shut down in front of witnesses. I didn't confirm it, but I didn't deny it either, because for years they used silence to keep me compliant. Now I was letting truth do the talking. I wasn't cruel. I didn't send messages or post anything online. I didn't tell friends what to say, but the damage was done. Not by me, but by them. You can only treat someone like an obstacle for so long before people start to notice who's always climbing and who's always stepping aside. People stopped offering them sympathy. They started offering me rides, meals, invitations. You must feel relieved, one neighbor said gently, handing me tomatoes from her garden, to finally be free of all that. I smiled. More than you know. I didn't need anyone to pay for what they did. Life was already sending the bill. I moved into my condo 2 weeks after the storm settled. There were fresh flowers waiting on the balcony, a gift from Emily. Aunt Ruth. The note read, "Your life belongs to you now. May it bloom." The first night, I sat in silence. No footsteps overhead, no tension humming under the walls, no one dropping by just to see if I needed help, but really checking the medicine cabinet and sizing up the furniture. Just me, a pot of tea, a crossword puzzle, and peace. Real peace. Not the kind I used to pretend I had to keep things smooth, to keep Derek from accusing me of being dramatic, or Jenna from calling me fragile. This was something earned. And finally, mine. Emily came by the next morning to help me unpack. She opened boxes like she was handling museum pieces, my old photo albums, my wedding dishes, the quilt Gary's mother had made us in, 68. "We should do something with this," she said, holding up a worn baby sweater I'd kept for no reason other than memory. "A donation, maybe? A fund?" I raised an eyebrow. "A fund?" She nodded, eyes bright. "I'm working with a local shelter. I want to start a small grant in your name. For older women starting over. We could call it the Ruth Langley Restart Fund." For a moment I couldn't speak. I just touched her hand. That baby sweater had found its purpose. So had I. And then, a week later, a letter came. Derek's handwriting on the envelope. No return address. Just my name, written like it used to be, before it meant property. Before it meant access. Inside. "Mom, I took you for granted. I didn't see how tired you were. I thought the house meant security. I didn't realize how much it had become a burden for you, or how much I expected without giving anything back. I'm sorry. I hope someday you'll forgive me, but I understand if you don't. Love, Derek." I read it twice, then folded it carefully, smoothed the edges, and placed it in the drawer beside my tea bags, not to reread, not to reply, just to let it exist, not out of bitterness, but peace. Because I didn't need an apology to move forward. I already had everything I needed. The quiet, the flowers, the keys in my own hand. After all these years, my life was mine again.